Welcome everybody again to another week on Ramban Parsha, Ramban HaTorah. I'm Eli Weber. I'm nizcheh to be the director of the overseas program here in Yeshiva, and it's my great zchus to learn Ramban with you every week. This week, first of all, we want to speak about Pinchas and the Torah's view of him. Obviously, it's positive, but I think in the Ramban it's slightly more nuanced. HaKadosh Baruch Hu supports his action for sure, but what's the idea of being a Kanai? And what's good about it, what's perhaps less good about it. Then we want to move on to the Ramban's famous discussion of if Bnot Moav sinned with Klal Yisrael, why Tzaror Hamidyanim? Where'd they come in? We'd like to then move on to Bnot Tzelafchad. There's a lot in this week's Parsha, Bnot Tzelafchad, why the need for them to admit a sin on behalf of their father, but v'hu lo haya ba'adat Korach. And finally, if we have time, Parshat HaTamid, which we say every day. What's it doing in this week's Parsha? What are the Musafim doing in this week's Parsha? Okay, that's a broad introduction. Let's start. Beginning of the Parsha. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Pinchas ben Elazar ben Aaron HaKohen, Heishivet chamati me'al Bnai Yisrael, bekano et kinati betocham, v'lo chiliti et Bnai Yisrael bekinati. Right? Nothing could be more positive, more endorsing of what Pinchas did than to say he saved Klal Yisrael. And on some level, that's exactly what the Ramban says. The first Ramban in the Parsha says, Hodia HaKadosh Baruch Hu Moshe sheyishalem sachar tov lepinchas al kanato asher kinei lelokav ve'al hatzdaka she'asa im Yisrael lechaper alehem. Right? God wants to pay Pinchas back for the great thing that he did, which was saving Klal Yisrael. V'lo meitu kulam b'magefa, right? It says the Ramban, they would have all died b'magefa, but Pinchas saved them. How did he say? So what does God want of Moshe? V'tzivahu sheyodia liYisrael shehu kohen la'olam. Says the Ramban, it's not just that he's becoming a kohen, but he asks Moshe to tell all of Klal Yisrael, they should understand that this is precisely why Pinchas is becoming a kohen. V'zetam lachein emor. Right? The pasuk says lachein emor hineni notein lo et briti shalom. Who's Moshe supposed to tell it to? The answer is Moshe is supposed to tell Klal Yisrael that because Pinchas did this, he's going to get briti shalom and he's going to be a kohen going forward. K'mo shamar ba'aron. Now it gets very hard. This is kind of a Kabbalistic idea. Aval amar brit kuhunat olam v'amar et briti shalom. He's not just giving him shalom, he's giving him the brit of shalom. What's the difference between giving him shalom and giving him the brit of shalom? I'll make the following suggestion. When you're a Kanai, when you kill a person, as Pinchas did, it's part of who you are. It's how people see you. It's how you see yourself, even if you're the nicest guy in the world. Once you kill somebody, and the killing was completely justified, but once you kill somebody, your nature changes. You start seeing yourself as a person who's capable of killing somebody. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives him Brit Shalom, not just Shalom, but Brit Shalom, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is undoing that fact. Okay? There's nothing wrong with being a Kanai, unless you're a Kanai by nature. If you're a Kanai by nature, that's a problem. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm going to make Pinchas, I'm going to give him Briti Shalom. The Briti Shalom literally undoes what he had done. He killed somebody. It was part of who he is. It was part of his nature. It's how people saw him. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, no, I don't want that. I don't want him to be identified as a Kanai. Obviously, we think of him that way. But I'm going to give him the kahuna as a result of this, and by the giving him the Brit Shalom, I'm going to undo what he did to himself. The negative parts of being a Kanai, I'm going to undo. And you're going to tell that to Klal Yisrael so that they'll see Pinchas as he was and not as he is. Okay, that's the first point. But then the Ramban goes on. Why does the next pasuk say, then you have a strange pasuk. V'shem ish Yisrael hamukah asher hukat Hamidyanim zimri ben salun yisi beitav lashimoni. V'shem ha'isha hamukah, etc. Why the need? Says the Ramban, v'hiskir v'shem ish Yisrael hamukah v'shem ha'isha hamukah lahodia ki ra'ui haya l'sachar hagadol hazeh. He's worthy of this great reward from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Sheharag nasi b'Yisrael ubat melech goyim. He didn't just kill anybody. He killed a nasi. Now, what does it mean to kill a nasi? I don't know for sure, but I imagine that it involved a risk. It involved somebody else getting angry. Certainly the halacha is that Kanai pogim bo, but if one of the victims turned around and killed Pinchas, he'd be potter for legamre. He's allowed to defend himself. Pinchas took a risk, and he wasn't just killing anybody. He was killing a princess and a Nisi Yisrael. V'lo yara mehem b'kinato le'elokav. Because his kanaut was so great, because his anger was so great, he wasn't afraid of the consequences. Va'acharei shenatan tzaror hatov latzadik, says Ramban, after God praises and gives a gift to Pinchas, okay, tzivo lihi para min harishaim v'amar lo tzaror Minyanim. Then the Parsha moves on. Says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's not as if what Pinchas did was riskless. Pinchas killed important people. Okay, Cosby, it doesn't matter. She's a Goya, and we're not afraid of the Minyanim. But Zimri was the head of Shevet Shimon, and he took a risk in killing him. And perhaps the risk justifies the reward. It wasn't like, oh, this is a fun thing to do, I'll kill them. There was a real worry here on his part. And it gets us back to the idea of what is a Kanai. We know the halacha is, it's strange to say the halacha is Kanaim pogim bo, ve'ein morin kain. So what does that mean? So I once heard Rav Moshe Albano quote his grandfather, and I remembered because he said, not that grandfather. So this is now Rav Aaron's father, who said, halacha ve'ein morim kain is the definition of a Kanai. If you're in enough self-control to go to Bezin, to ask the question, should I do this? You're not a Kanai, and the Bezin says no. If you can't stop yourself, your anger is so great, and your anger is great because your love of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is so great, and that's why you do it, that's exactly who you are. Halacha ve'ein morim kain means if you're in control enough to ask the halacha, you're not a Kanai. It's lovely, you want to do it, but the Bezin says you don't. If you do it first, then you're Pinchas. Okay, those are some thoughts on Kanaut. Next question, as the Ramban hinted at. Bnai Yisrael sinned with Bnot Moav. It's clear they sinned with Bnot Moav. All of a sudden you have Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor Tzaror Hamidyanim b'hikitem otam. It's a famous problem in the Parsha. What do the Minyanim have to do with anything? Says the Ramban as follows. Ka'asher perashti, ki ziknei midyan chashvu hamachshava hara'a hazot. It was always the idea of ziknei midyan. Ki Moshe ne'amar vayomer Moav el ziknei midyan. Ki bahem nityatzu mitchila, vehem natnu etza zo leMoav, shetiznena binotam imahem, v'yatzmidu otam leval pa'ar lahadicha me'al Hashem. It was the Midyanim, not the Moavim, who had this odious idea of getting Klal Yisrael to sin with Baal Pa'or through the women. Moav did it, but it was the Minyanim's idea. V'im lo nizkar sham, even though it's not mentioned specifically in the Torah. V'od sheshalchu lahem bat malkam liznot imahem. What's a greater proof of the fact that it was their idea? That they sent their princess. V'zetam v'al devar kozbi bat nesi midyan achotam. Ki lulei midat yoatzei al-malchut na'asa. If it wasn't the official position of the Midianite delegation to have the daughters of Moav and their own princess seduce Klal Yisrael, kfuda bat melech b'midyan ma tivakesh bashitim ba'arvot Moav lavo el machana im am acher. Ki Yisrael ba'arvot Moav b'shitim hayu. Ume'ayin tavo sham hamidyanit hazot. Right, says the Ramban, it doesn't make any sense that the princess of Midyan happened to be around Klal Yisrael. They didn't live there. Midyan wasn't under attack from Klal Yisrael. He said they took her, they dressed her up to play the part, to be mizana with Klal Yisrael. That's not an accident. It's not like she happened to be at the canteen and they met each other. And she was sent there for purposes of the Aveira. Aval hayta yifatar ma'od. So the Ramban, she was very beautiful. Vishalchu otam ziknei midyan sham, ki amru bitar isha yafa rabim hushchatu. Right? It's a pasuk in Ben Sira. I wouldn't have known. I looked it up. But the idea is, a beautiful woman seduces people. That's how the world works. So the first thing is, and if we on a simple level, we would say as follows. The Ramban says, the people who thought of the Aveira are worse than the people who committed the Aveira. Yes, it's true, Bnot Moav actually carried out the plan. But Ziknei Midyan came up with the plan. And their sin is, it's much, much worse to sit around at a conference table and think of, the final solution or think of some evil thing to do to the Jews than it is to just respond, instinctively to the fear. Moab was afraid. Midyan was at a distance and they were dispassionate, and they came up with the Aveira, and says the Ramban, that's much worse than Moab. Now, while the Ramban's at it, he's going to close a circle that we've had from other Parshiot. V'karovhu shehaya gam bil'am be'etza hazo. By the way, says the Ramban, it's not as we discussed a few weeks ago. Bilam is an evil person. He's a rasha because of what he did in Parshas Balak. No, it's here. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure that Bilam was part of the advisory group. Ki bishuvo me'eretz Moav avar b'midyan, ki darko misham. It was on his way home. Vayab biyoatzei ha'malchut. He was one of the advisors. Speculates the Ramban. V'ulai nitakev sham ladat ma yeh bohem. Lefikach mitzauhu Yisrael b'midyan v'harguhu. Right? Bilam stuck around to see if the plan was going to work. Klal Yisrael found him there and killed him. V'yeh perush vayakam Bilam vayelech vayashav limkamo shalach lo lashuv el artzo. He was on his way home. V'chein nira ki Yisrael lo hargu hamitnabei rak b'shut HaTorah. Says the Ramban a number of times, and here too he says, the Jews wouldn't kill somebody like Bilam for no reason. It must be they saw that HaKadosh Baruch Hu somehow gave them permission to kill Bilam. V'aval, ka'asher nemar lahem, ki tzorim heim b'nichlehem asher nikelu lachem. B'nichlehem asher nikelu lachem is really the conspiracy that they conspired. It wasn't the Aveira. It was the idea of the Aveiras that people sat around and thought, we should do this to the Jews, including Bilam. That makes them Rishaim. Kol hamitnachalim, mitnachalim with a chaf, not settlers. But mitnachlim, they plan, they plot, they conspire against the Jews. Mechuyvei mita. V'lachein heimitu gam Bilam, ki yadu shehu bal ha'itza hara'ah hazot. Okay? So again, first point in the Ramban is that the people who plan it are much worse than the people who do it. The people who do it were literally afraid of, they were actually afraid of the Jews. They did what they had to do to survive. Of course, they didn't know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu told the Jews, you can't attack Moab. So they were afraid. But Midyan, they were just anti-Semites. Midyan, they sat around with Bilam as their leader. They came up with this plan, and says the Ramban, if they came up with the plan, they have to be punished for the plan because that's pure evil. That's more evil than actually doing the arayos that the Bnot Moav did. And then, of course, he says, and Bilam, they finally got him here because it was his plan to begin with. Okay, 2 points. Let's go on to Bnot Tzelafchad. Not because the story is so interesting, but a prat in the story makes it fascinating to us and reveals to us how the Ramban imagines things and reads them closely. And when he gets an idea in his mind, because he reads a Parsha a certain way, that becomes his explanation going forward. Okay? In Perek Chav Zayin, Bnot Tzelafchad come to Moshe, and they say as follows. Avinu meit ba'midbar, V'hu lo haya ba'adat b'tocha edo hanoadim al Hashem ba'adat Korach ki bechet omet uvanim lo hayu lo. And if you're just reading the pasuk for the first time, you think to yourself, why do they have to go out of their way and say they weren't part of Adat Korach? First of all, everybody who was in the Midbar died out of a sin. The sin was called the Ched HaMeraglim, right? But even if he had another sin, why do you show up to tell Moshe Rabbeinu when you're about to ask him for a favor, right? Tzelafchad had no sons. The daughters are going to ask for a nachala. So what's the point of telling them, Avinu meit bam, Vehu lo haya b'toch ha'edu anodim al Hashem ba'adat korach, ki becheto meit. What's going on? So the Ramban answers as follows. Vehu lo haya lefi sheba'u lomar becheto meit. Nizkeku lomar lo bechet mitonanim v'lo ba'adat korach shehitzu al HaKadosh Baruch Hu haya ela becheto levado v'lo hechti acharim imo lashon Rashi. Okay, first the Ramban quotes Rashi that what they were saying was he wasn't a chote umachti. He didn't cause anybody else to sin. He sinned in his own, his own crime, and therefore they shouldn't be punished. V'lo, says the Ramban, v'lo piresh lama hayu ba'ot lomar becheto meit. Rashi doesn't explain why they said in the first place becheto meit, ela shetomarna avinu meit ba'midbar uvanim lo hayu lo. That's all they needed to say. Our father died, he has no sons. Ki kein hara'u lehe'amer. Aval al dat rabotenu hutzruchu lomar shelo haya ba'adat korach lefi she'adat korach lo haya lahem chelek ba'aretz. Okay, so the first thing the Ramban suspects based on Chazal is that there was an understanding that the descendants of Korach, those who were involved in Korach's plot, weren't nochel Eretz Yisrael, so they felt the need to tell Moshe that their father wasn't part of that group. V'chein lamitlonenim sheba Adat Korach. Ki nishma ze ba'am mi beit dino shel Moshe. Okay, that was the understanding from the basin of Moshe. None of them would inherit the land. Therefore, it was critical that they tell Moshe that their father wasn't part of that group. Okay. V'da'ati b'derech hapshat, says the Ramban, my opinion, based on Pshat, she'amru kacha, ba'avur shechashvu shemoshe Rabbeinu haya sonei Adat Korach yoter mikol hachotim shemetu b'midbar. Says the Ramban, it's an unbelievable thing. And he used the word sinah about Moshe Rabbeinu. He says, Tzelafchad and others thought that Moshe hated Korach and Dasan and Aviram and everything that happened. Now, why would the Ramban assume that? Because when the Ramban read in Parshas Korach, it was extremely personal. When Moshe says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Al tefen el milchatam, lo chamor echad mehem nasati, v'lo harioti echad mehem, they picked on Moshe personally. Rav Lachem b'nei Levi, they basically attacked Moshe Rabbeinu. And when the Ramban reads Parshas Korach, he says to himself, Moshe's really, really angry, and he's really taking it personally. Moshe wasn't angry at Klal Yisrael when they complained about the water, when they complained about the slav, okay, that was a normal complaint. They thought Moshe was a bad leader. They attacked him. But it wasn't his character they attacked. The case of Korach and Dasan and Aviram was exceptionally personal for Moshe Rabbeinu, because they basically said, God never said Aaron should be the Kohen Gadol. God never said any of these things. You, because you're selfish, because you want more than you deserve, and Moshe Rabbeinu took it personally. And I think the Ramban just saw that in Korach, and he put it here. If they said, V'hu lo haya ba'adat Korach, it's because they thought if he was ba'adat Korach, Moshe would kick them out, because he hated them. And he hated them for a proper, good reason. Let's continue. Okay. Shehem hayu hakamim kinegdo v'hakofrim b'chol ma'asav. Right? It wasn't just a political discussion about what's the right path. Should we go back to Mitzrayim? Should we not? It was a personal attack on Moshe. V'chashvu. Now the Bnot Tzelafchad thought, Ulai b'sinato otam, because Moshe hates Adat Korach, Yomar al yehi lo Moshe chesed va'al yehi chonen li tomav. I don't care that they're Yisomim. I don't care that their father had no sons. he was related to Korach, he was part of that attack on me, I'm going to kick them out. Yizkar avon avotam al Hashem. Al kain hodiuhu ki lo haya mehem. V'ramzu od she'eno b'meitei ha'magefot aval b'midbar meit al mitato. He died for his own reason. V'ta'am ki b'chet omed. Okay, so why did they have to say ki b'chet omed? Not only why did they have to say v'hu lo haya ba'adat korach, why did they have to say he died for a sin? Amru meit b'midbar ba'avono shelo zachal li kanes ba'aretz. Okiv Rabbi Yehuda Halevi HaMishorer shepirei shehu davek im ubanim lo hayulo. That was his sin. Kasher yomar hayom ba'avonot ira kach v'kach. Like we'd say, oh, God forbid something happened, something bad happened. Okay? But here you feel without any, I don't want to say without any textual support, because the Ramban has real textual support, but it's a classic idea of the Ramban. I read a story a certain way, and again, he read the story with human beings. We make the mistake that we read the story with Moshe Albano. Moshe Albano didn't have any feelings. He was Moshe Albano. It must have all been beyond us. No, says the Ramban. It was extremely personal. It was difficult. And Moshe, it's difficult. It's hard to say. Moshe hated them. But the Ramban uses the word twice. He used the word sinah twice. And the sense you get is that it's justified. That after what they did to him, Moshe couldn't be expected to respond to otherwise. And therefore the Bnot Tzelafchad came and said, Avinu meit b'amidrav v'hu lo haya ba'adat korach, because their assumption was, and the Ramban says it's a correct assumption, that Moshe hated Adat Korach. Okay? I think if you read Korach carefully and you read those psukim, you would leave with the same impression. And it's classic Ramban that he doesn't just see something as it is, he imagines as it took place. He imagines what's Moshe's reaction, what's their approach to him. When Moshe comes to the camp of Dasan v'Aviram, and they yatsu'u nitzavim, and they attack him, your sense is you're really angry for what's going on. And says the Ramban, Moshe must have been really angry for what was going on. Okay, last point, if I can find it. Yes. Parshat HaTamid. Something we all know by heart. Savet Bnai Yisrael amarta lehem et karbani lachmi liishai reach nichochi tishmeru lahakriv li b'moado. Okay, we read it every Rosh Chodesh. We read it Shabbos Rosh Chodesh, right? In theory, we read it every day because it is the key pasuk for davening, right? Tfilos keneged timidim tiknum. These are the timidim that tfilot were keneged. But the Ramban has a different question. What's it doing in this week's Parsha? Okay, we had this great story of Pinchas. We had this great story of Bnot Tzelafchad. What's the Tamidim doing in this week's Parsha? So the Ramban reminds us, as he does often, what we're up to in Jewish history. Right? We're at the end of the Torah. Nothing happens narrative-wise in Devarim. It's Moshe's speech. We're now massing at Ever HaYarden. We're about to go in. Says the Ramban, Pasuk Chavchet, Parak Chavchet, Pasuk Bet. V'tam tzavet b'nei Yisrael v'amarta lehem et karban yilachmi liishai ki acharei she'amar lo ele techalei ka'aretz. After God told Moshe it's time to divide up the land, tziva lehashlim torat hakarbanot sheyasa kein ba'aretz. This is, says the Ramban, a mitzvah hatzluya ba'aretz. Ki bamidbar lo hikrivu hamusafim. Right? The same question we're asking on the Tamidim, we could ask on the Musafim. What are they doing in this week's Parsha? Why is it that on Yom Tov we read all the Haftarahs from Pinchas? Why do they stick it in there more? Says the Ramban, Ki bamidbar lo hikrivu hamusafim. That's a very deep line. The Ramban thinks we kind of kept holidays, but not really. Right? That the special karbanot that were brought were only brought in the Beit HaMikdash or in Eretz Yisrael. K'moshi izkarti b'seder amor lakonim. V'chein, lo nitchayvu b'nisachim b'amidbar, k'moshi parashi b'seder shlach lecha. They also didn't bring nisachim. V'achshav chiyev ba'ei ha'aretz la'asot sham hakol hatmidim v'hamusafim u'minchatam v'niskehem. But now that they're about to go into Eretz Yisrael, it's time to tell them there's such a thing called musafim, there's such a thing called all these karbonot that I have to tell you so that you could do that. V'ramaz elav b'parsha rishana b'moadot, v'hechel kan min hatamid. V'af al pi shenizkar b'parshat va'ata titzaveh. The truth is, the Tamidim were mentioned in Titzaveh. Hichziru lihiyot hakol sadur b'parsha achat. But says the Ramban, all of the musafim and all of the Tamidim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted it in one place. V'Rashi katav hi hayta ha'azhara limei hamiluim v'kan tziva l'dorot. Rashi says, no, in Titzaveh, it was just a reference that those karbonot should be brought in during the miluim. Now it's a commandment l'dorot. Says Ramban, ve'ino nachon. Ki sham amar olat tamid l'dorot techem. No, even in Titzaveh, God meant that this is a mitzvah l'doros. So says the Ramban, it's very simple. He says it's true. It doesn't say in any pasuk, ki tavo el haaretz. It doesn't have to. We're about to go into the land. We're standing on Aver Hayarden. We're about to go into the land. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just saying, when you go into the land, you have to bring these karbonot. Again, the whole Parsha, which is well known to us because of Kriyas HaTorah, is basically all based on the fact that it's a mitzvah tluya ba'aretz, not Tamid Shel Shachar and Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim, but all the Musafim are, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to put all the things in one Parsha, so it really starts. Every day I bring Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Bein Arbaim. On Shabbos I bring Uv Yom HaShabbat Shnei Chavasim B'nei Shana Tamimim. And on Rosh Chodesh I bring extra karbonot. And Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and Shavuos and Sukkot and Pesach, right? All these things are put together. Now, just one last thought, because I think if you were a Talmud in Yeshiva or if you went here, you probably heard this idea, and it's very meaningful. Both Rav Amital Zatzal and Rav Lichtenstein Zatzal used to quote a medrash. The medrash says, what's the most important principle in the Torah? So Rabbi Akiva says, V'ahavta l'recha kamocha ze klal gadol b'Torah. And we understand exactly why that would be klal gadol b'Torah. Says the next mandamer in the medrash, no, I have a klal yoter gadol heimena. What's that? Ze sefer toldot ha'adam bihi baram biyom asot Hashem Elokim eretz v'shamayim. The Torah telling us the greatness of man, the dignity of man, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to man, that's bigger than v'ahavta l'recha kamoch. Okay, there's a whole thing you could discuss in there. But there's a different girsa of the medrash. It's brought at the beginning of Ein Yaakov. And the medrash there says there's a bigger klal, bigger than v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, and bigger than Zeh Sefer Toldot Adam. And that is, Et hakeves echad ta'aseh baboker, ve'et hakeves hasheni ta'aseh ben ha'arbaim. And said both of our Rosh Yeshiva, to be a Jew means to do it every single day, means to do it consistently, means to do it constantly. It's true, we have the Yom Noram, and we have, we're about to start the 3 weeks. There are periods in our calendar which are more misugal for certain feelings than others. But said both of our Rosh Yeshiva, the commitment is every day. The commitment is davening 3 times a day. The commitment is to Talmud Torah every day. Et hakeves echad ta'aseh baboker ve'et hakeves hashin ta'aseh ben arbaim. Which day? Every day. And if we could do that, God willing, good things will happen. And the 3 weeks that we're about to enter will be the last time we have to endure them as days of Avelut. Shabbat Shalom.